Seagal, I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. Hey, WBAI in New York City, I'm all yours this week. I wasn't yours last week, but I do want to remind people, I do a show that airs in New York and in Washington, D.C. So even on the weeks that I'm not, if for whatever reason, special programming, I broke a leg, I mean, I don't, whatever, there's a good chance that I'm on in Washington, so you can always check me out on WPFW as well if you miss me on WBAI. Of course, on the weeks that I am on, the show gets put into the archives, and I also post the show up as a podcast. I usually stream the video, or at least stream the show on Facebook, or record the video and put it up on Facebook as well. So, lots of ways to catch what I'm doing. You probably didn't miss me because, frankly, I had a lot of media attention last week. With Donald Trump joining the fray on the mascot issue, I had a chance to do Native America Calling I think just yesterday. I did an interview with Buffalo's NPR station that aired yesterday or the day before, and I did the Brian Lehrer show. I will say, all three shows, I think I got my point across, and those are audios, so you can check them out. I think I've got the links posted on my Facebook group page for Resistance Radio. I think the show from WBFO in Buffalo was probably the better of the three. Look, I had a great time on Brian Lehrer's show a couple of years ago when we discussed the mascot issue. This show wasn't quite as good. He had a reporter from Newsday on who was supposed to be their education reporter, and I didn't think that he was the most informative. In fact, most things that he was asked, he didn't have an answer for. And frankly, I would have liked to have weighed in a little bit more with Brian Lehrer. Like I said, I had a good experience with him the first time. This last time was okay, but my tongue was bleeding a little bit as I listened to the rest of the broadcast. I would have loved to address even a couple of the callers who called in, but sadly I wasn't able to do that. On Native America Calling, I opened up that show, and it was a pretty good segment. There were two other Native guests on the mascot issue: David Glass from Minnesota and Ted Turillo from Illinois, and they're not radio show hosts, but I think they managed the questioning pretty well. Then there was another segment on a lawsuit out of New Mexico that wasn't related to the mascot issue. I did come back at the very end when they did take a call, and the caller asked for me to address a question about residential schools, which I have to mention in conjunction with white kids being able to take Native identity as a part of their mascots, while Native kids were being beaten to have the Native identity removed from them. I'm not going to belabor the point too much. Although, look, the reason this has become a national dialogue is because of Donald Trump, and it's almost sickening and sad that that's the case. I will say that Trump will have no impact on New York State's ban against high schools using Native mascots. It doesn't matter how much Massapequa begs and whines to Donald Trump. This ban has been upheld in state court, and it's been upheld in federal court. Donald Trump is already threatening all states with suspending the funding for lunch programs and special ed and that kind of stuff, just because he's kind of a jerk, and he's threatening to suspend that funding over his DEI, his anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion stance. So there's nothing more he can threaten New York State with. You're already threatening to suspend funding over DEI programs, which New York State has flat out said, we're not suspending those programs. We believe in diversity, we believe in equity, and we believe in inclusion. And if you don't, you're the one with the problem here. And there's no other way to address that issue. If your stance is against DEI because you have this misbelief that somehow it means that a black person is going to get hired for a job over a white person, that's exactly what DEI doesn't do. DEI is completely merit-based. What it's saying is you're not going to get brownie points for being whitey. That's bottom line what it means. It means that you're not going to get your white privilege is going to be diminished if you have proper DEI policies and programs associated with your school, your organization, your company. But that doesn't mean you're going to get that. This isn't affirmative action in any way, shape, or form. It is really equity. which means fairness. So if you're against fairness, and Donald Trump, we know you are, so be it. But New York State is under no additional threat from Donald Trump because he's got the wrestling lady looking into whether this is a civil rights violation or not. I also might add that the governor of Maine, who told Trump, "I'll see you in court if you're going to try to do, you're going to try to take us on and dictate to us what we're going to do in our schools," she did see him in court and she won. So Donald Trump he's got nothing here. And I think he always knew he had nothing here. I mean, honestly, I know he knows this was just distraction. Why is it a distraction? Because he's screwing everything else up. So why not throw in conversations about Alcatraz or or the mascot issue or bringing back Columbus Day or whatever other ridiculous thing you're going to say, or posting pictures of you as the Pope. And I'm sorry, I got to say it. Yes, there's an American Pope. No, it's not Donald Trump. And I'm not even going to suggest that it might as well be. But let's face it, the whole American exceptionalism thing is just too much to handle. The idea that there's an American Pope is, I don't know, it's a little hard to swallow. Look, I'm Native. I know what the Catholic Church has done to Native people, not only through residential schools, but historically. I mean, the discovery doctrine is based on papal bulls from the Vatican. So the whole idea that the church has authorized the Christian nations of Europe to vanquish pagans, Saracens, and other enemies of Christ. Yeah, that's the Catholic Church. That's the Pope. And you know what? This Pope is a white guy too. They're all white guys. I don't care if where they're from the United States, from South America, from wherever. They're all white guys. And this wasn't even that much of a debate. I don't think it only went to a handful of votes to determine that, yeah, let's get the American guy. Now I get it. He has spent time abroad, so he's not he hasn't been solely stuck in the United States in the midst of all of this madness. But look, I'm not going to do a show on the Pope. Let's just say I'm not going to do a show on the Pope. I'm hoping I'll take some callers later on. But let me say this. Look, we are listener-supported radio. First and foremost, I got to tell you, and I am only on in New York City as far as the radio goes. So I am asking, if you listen to this program, if you listen to the station, that you support WBAI. For all the talk about funding being suspended to public radio and the Corporation for Public Broadcast, we weren't getting any of that anyway. We haven't in as long as I know. I'm sure we did at some point, but we haven't in a long time. So that's not hurting us. What's hurting us is perhaps apathy from our listeners. So we need your support. I mean, it's not a given that we're always going to be here. And it's not a given that we can do this all the time. We can only do it with your support. So I do ask that you go to your phone lines, you go to your computers, or or whatever, your phone, go online and make a donation to WBAI. And if you do it in the name of this radio, or this program in particular, look, I greatly appreciate it. I greatly appreciate it. It doesn't come to me. It goes to WBAI. It covers operations. It covers the great people that we do have working for the station, guys like Reggie Johnson. It goes to cover the expenses associated with doing a radio station, which is no small enterprise in New York City. It's a great city to do radio in. It's an incredible radio market. You would think a station in New York City should have no problem funding itself, but look, there's a lot of competition. Many of these other stations have received, if they're commercial radio, they're receiving all kinds of money from advertisers. If they're public radio or community radio, many of them have received millions of dollars of federal funding. Not us. We rely on you, and we rely on you solely. So I do ask that you go to the pledge line. You can call 1-833-WBAI-NYC. That's 1-833-922-4692. You can donate by credit card or debit card, you can set up an automatic electronic transfer from your checking account. You can become a buddy, and you can do that by going online too. If you'd rather not talk to somebody, and if you want to go online and do it very securely, where nobody else is handling your information, you can go to buddy.wbai.org, and you can follow the prompts to become a buddy. And look, if you do it in the name of this program, what you're telling management is that you listen to this program, that you appreciate this program, even if you don't agree with everything I say, because that's not what I'm selling here. I'm not trying to convert. This isn't native missionary work here. I'm trying to educate, and education's tough because part of what I have to present to you is something that's going to make you unlearn what you've learned, and that's always a difficult task. Part of the reason I have put such an emphasis on the mascot issue is because it's teaching kids a false narrative about who we are. It's teaching kids that we are those emblems on a football helmet. It's not teaching any history. So when I listen to the folks from Massapequa, I'm sorry. Don't sit there and try to suggest that your mascot is somehow representative of Native history. You're using a Plains Indian headdress, for crying out loud. You're not even using an image that at any point in time ever represented the Native people who lived there. Not in the 17th century, not the 18th century, and certainly not today. Why? Because there are no Native people that live there. I think I saw one news story that said there might be a couple of Native people who reside in the district. But demographically, if you look up Massapequa, no Native people show up in the demographics. That means that they're less than 1/10 of 1%. Otherwise, it would at least show up. So, no, you're not honoring us. You never were. It was never your intention. It was about you. That's what these mascots are. They're about the people who bring them in and who adopt them. Why? Because they want to claim some characteristics that they think the mascot represents. And if you're using our stuff, the likelihood is that it doesn't. I mean, in my culture, those men who were labeled chiefs, not our word, they were not warriors. They were the antithesis of warriors. They were the peacemakers. That's what they were. But that doesn't work for a school mascot. You can't have peace guys. I mean, you gotta have war. You gotta have violence. You gotta have aggression. You gotta have all this stuff to be your mascot. Otherwise, how do you compare it to the lions and tigers and bears? No. So look, I've had my fill of listening to all these people claim that that it's intended to honor us. It was never intended to honor us. It's always been about you. It's always been about you. And in fact, when I hear people say that you're erasing the Native history of an area, no, I'm saying learn the Native history of the area. Learn about the massacres that took place in Massapequa. Learn about the residential schools. Learn about the disease blankets that were handed out. Learn about all the atrocities that your founding fathers, your forefathers, did to Native people. And if you learned all that stuff, you probably wouldn't want to use us for your mascot. It's kind of like Nazis using Jews for a mascot. I mean, you just wouldn't do it. You just wouldn't do it. So, look, I know I've talked about a lot about this issue, and part of the reason I talk about it is because it is so emblematic, not just of white privilege, but when I think about doctrine of Christian discovery, when I think about these, this idea that we've been casted out as wards of the federal government, or that we are somehow property. I mean, you can't go and take tens of thousands of children, rip them from their families, send them to a place to wipe out their nativeness without asserting that you own those children, like we were property. And you know what? That's what this mascot thing is all about. You've not only treated us like we were property to be removed, almost like a pestilence that had to be wiped out off the land, but doing those things to us physically and doing those things to us wasn't quite enough. No, you had to claim our identity as well. And of course, you don't really learn who we were or are. You create the image that suits you. So you rely on Hollywood. You rely on your mythology about what a Native person is, and that's what you use for a mascot. You have no concern about who we really are. Not one of those schools in Long Island reached out to the Uncle Chug or to the Shinnecock. Not one. Not one. And look, you weren't going to get permission, so I understand why you didn't. But you didn't even try to have a dialogue. So when I see these guys bringing some Native people from this Native American Guardians Association, a group of frauds as they are, that's just laughable. So you have those morons that Fox News puts on television. Then you combine that with a plea to Donald Trump, to do photo ops with your logoed your logoed sweatshirts and that kind of stuff, which is just ridiculous. I've got nothing to say. Look, I brought a film out to Long Island. I brought Sugarcane, a film about residential schools, out to Long Island. I asked the people of these school districts to come and see the film. Sit down and watch a film about the atrocities that were committed against Native people. And if you can sit through that film and still feel good about claiming us for your mascot, then we don't really need to have a conversation anymore. And look, I knew you wouldn't come because you don't want to hear truth. Truth is is the last thing you want. You want validation. So you look for the one group that claims to represent Native people, and they don't. They're not endorsed by any Native organization, meaning that Guardians group. Or you look for endorsement from a guy who's trying to wipe out anything that would have anything to do with equity or inclusion or diversity. So it's clear. You got the same guy who comes out to your territories to, at least verbally, I guess, with support for your mascot. The very next day says, no, we're going to wipe out Indigenous Peoples Day too. And we're gonna bring back Columbus Day like it went anywhere. You can't make this stuff up. You really can't. So look, I don't want to reiterate everything that I did in last week's show, even though I wasn't on in New York last week. But I just think that some of these things need to be said. They just need to be said. And look, part of what I do here is I try to explain how Native people are victims of a unique kind of racism. The mascots are emblematic of that. Obviously, this idea of white privilege, this idea that you can take our identity and use it for your amusement and entertainment. You can't define white privilege any greater than that. But there is that, and that's a unique racism because no other peoples are used this way. I know somebody's going to say, "Well, the Fighting Irish." Look, they were Irish people who developed that mascot. You're not Native people using a Native imagery for mascots. You're white folks. You're white people using Native people, and you don't do it to anybody else. You would never use a black man for a mascot, or an Asian, or a Jewish person. You would never do that, and nor would any of those people stand for it. And even if you could find that one black guy or that one Jewish person, you know what? That's just absurd. Yet you'll look for that one Native guy, that one person who is either Native or claims to be, to come in, and you'll bypass all the Native people on the way. You didn't bring any Shinnecock, you didn't bring any Uncle Chug there, and you certainly wouldn't sit across the table with me. And that's what I'm saying. Look, you want to have a conversation? Let's have a conversation. But you don't. You don't. You just want to validate your exploitation of a people. And look, Massapequa in particular, because you use the most mundane, stereotypical Hollywood image possible. The whole Plains Indian headdress, that's what you use, which just flies in the face of any claim that you make that it's somehow about honoring Native people or your history. I don't care if your town's called Massapequa. The fact is you wiped out all the Native people there. That's what you did. And you did it in a variety of ways. And don't suggest that it was all just a legal transfer of title because you paid one guy off. After you massacred most of the people there, did you get somebody to accept some money? And that's your claim that you bought the land fair and square? Give me a freaking break. Look, so when I talk about the unique racism, the mascot issue obviously has to be part of that discussion. But the main concentration of my work, and I talk about it all the time, are specific legal doctrines that are slave era that still exist today. So abolition happens, all the Reformation happens, all this stuff happens, Reconstruction, all this stuff happens, civil rights happens, and yet Native people to this day are still regarded as wards of the federal government. I mean, how is that even possible? What was the legal basis for making that declaration? Because I'm going to tell you, Chief Justice John Marshall in the 1820s up to the 30s created these legal doctrines. That's slave era. That's slave era thinking and reasoning. And most of that you would think is gone by now, but it's not. And for him to suggest that somehow that all of this stuff is constitutional, then read the goddamn thing. And you know what? Don't just read the Constitution. Read the deliberation that went into it. Read the deliberation that went into the Articles of Confederation. Why? Because I have. I've read it. And there is nothing that the founding fathers of the United States, either under the Articles of Confederation or in the U.S. Constitution, there is nothing that suggested that we were to be regarded as wards of the federal government, or that we were anything but equivalent to a foreign nation as far as sovereignty went. I mean, we were part of the treaty clause. Yeah, you're going to treaty with foreign nations and with Indian tribes. Yeah, I'm not crazy about the wording, but the Commerce Clause, Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, among several states, and with Indian tribes. Not of Indian tribes. And look, there was some conversation during the Articles of Confederation. There was some conversation about using or stating that Congress should have the power to regulate affairs with, again, not of, but affairs, more broadly, affairs with Indians. But that was rejected. And it wasn't just an oversight. Oh, yeah, we meant to say affairs, but we somehow only put, trade and commerce in there. No, that wasn't it. You knew you didn't have the authority to do it. Look, you knew that there were certain Native people that were living amongst you and that were part of your communities. And that's where the expression Indians not taxed came from, because you had some of our people already. Probably some of them had been, mixed blood by then and were basically, coming along with the whole idea of, of colonialism. But the vast majority of Native people were not a part of any of your states. And in fact, before you would even try to make a colony a state, you moved Native people off. Now, it was still lands that you were trying to assert some sort of discovery title to, which is a whole nother crock of crap. But there is nothing in any of the deliberations, either for the Articles of Confederation or the U.S. Constitution. And you can look it up yourself. There's a great piece done, I think, by a guy by the name of Mark Savage. You can look it up. I mean, but there's many people. Peter Dorico has done a great job doing the analysis on this. A lawyer from UMass at Amherst. I mean, and of course, then you've got the work of guys like Stephen Newcomb and other people. So you don't need to take my word for it. But if I say this stuff and it rubs you the wrong way, then call me out. Look it up. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where someplace in the U.S. Constitution it says that Native people should be subjugated as wards of the federal government, or that Congress, under the auspices of the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, were intended to have ultimate power over Native people. Sam Alito questioned this. Obviously, the other guy who questioned it of all people is Clarence Thomas. But Sam Alito said, plenary powers? Well, if plenary means plenary, that means that Congress can do whatever it wants. I don't see any places that restrict anything, that put any limits to the authority that Congress can have over Native people. And the Solicitor General of the United States said, well, they're kind of bound by their trust responsibility, which is another joke. So the whole thing, it's just circular reasoning with no place in the Constitution, no place in law, no place in the world. Because, look, here's the other thing I want to make clear. There's nothing in the Articles of Confederation or the Constitution of the United States that suggested we were a conquered people. Yes, you did. You got Great Britain to sign, sign over, all kinds of stuff in the Treaty of Paris at the end of the Revolutionary War. Regardless of us being pulled into your scrap with your mother, we weren't the ones we didn't sign anything. We didn't give anything away. We neither declared war or signed a peace treaty. The UK might have, but we didn't. And you know it, and that's why there's nothing in any of the language that suggests that while you may have taken, and it's not like you conquered Great Britain, you just fought them for your independence. I mean, you weren't fighting us for your independence. We just knew that Great Britain had been a lot more fair with us, for the most part, than the colonists had. The colonists were killing our people all along. So to the extent that some Native people, and not all, and not even all Haudenosaunee, let's be clear, to the extent that some of our people, some Native people, stood with their treaty obligations with Great Britain, was not necessarily a declaration of war against you. So no, we weren't conquered. We weren't. I mean, and there's nothing in the historical record to suggest that. So even in 1924, when the United States declares that we are citizens of the United States, you can't declare us citizens. You can't. I mean, that's actually, to be clear, that's actually considered a war crime. Before the word genocide was even developed, there were the thinkers of the world, as they sat and deliberated over global justice. They said, look, denationalization is a war crime. The idea of stripping away somebody's national character or cultural character and imposing yours upon them, that's a crime. This is before the United Nations. This is before the term genocide was even developed. Denationalization, look it up. Look it up. I mean, this was the thinking. And this was coming out of World War I. So it had nothing to do with us even. I mean, neither genocide nor denationalization was a response to what the United States was doing to us people. No, not to our people. It was what was happening in Europe and other places of the world. So the idea of stripping away somebody's national character, which is what the residential schools was all about, which is what the trust doctrine was all about, which is what the plenary powers doctrine was all about. What I'll say about the Citizenship Act of 1924, I believe in my heart that the intent was to erase us by making us U.S. citizens. Because look, a country cannot have a treaty with its own citizens. So if you make all of us your citizens, which you didn't do with your declaration, you may have declared it, but that didn't make it so. So if a country can wipe out the citizenry of their opponent, either eliminate them by killing us all, or somehow incorporating us, which didn't happen. Look, this was statutory citizenship. This wasn't constitutional citizenship. We're not in the Constitution anywhere. Even in the 13th and 14th Amendment, where slavery was ended, and then black people were recognized as citizens. So the birthright citizenship, we didn't qualify for birthright citizenship because we were not under U.S. jurisdiction. So there's no place in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, in any of the amendments, that suggests that we were constitutionally granted citizenship. You did it through a unilateral act that was illegal, that by many estimations within the world would have been considered a war crime. It was denationalization, plain and simple. So, look, this is what I talk about. This is why I do this program. So this is why I ask you, if you get anything off of this, and look, I know there's other Native programs, even on this station. Look, I get that. I'm not trying to entertain. I'm not, and I have no problem with Native entertainers. In fact, I enjoy being entertained, by Native people as well. I watch every film. I listen to all the music. I do it all, but I don't sing and dance. So I'm not trying to entertain. I'm trying to tell some truths, some uncomfortable truths. And while people are clamoring about the genocide in Africa or genocide in Gaza, all I'm saying is just don't ignore what's happened here and what is still happening here. The doctrine of Christian discovery, I know I say this all the time, but I'm going to say it again, was cited in 2005 by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yeah, the liberal darling of the court cited the doctrine of Christian discovery in her footnotes. She also used an expression, by the way, and I got to say this because I just was using this as something I was writing up this week. She also used an expression about our sovereignty. And she basically referred to our sovereignty, and she said, the embers of our sovereignty had long grown cold. And and that's just a sickening appropriation. I mean, look, we have an expression in our culture called gawazerde, and it means fire, but it also means family, but it also means council, to come together, because that's what families do. And to build a fire, you bring the logs together, right? That's how you build a fire. So gawazerde has these multiple layers of meaning, but they all kind of come from the same place. The idea of warmth and protection and light. So it's kind of what families provide, right? It's kind of what coming together provides. It provides a comfort. It provides a warmth. It provides enlightenment. So when we talk about death in our community, we talk about the image of a woman with a staff that strikes onto our fire and scatters our logs. Scatters the embers and the ashes, and the smoke goes up. And that smoke gets in our eyes, and the embers, they too get in our eyes. They get in our ears. They parch our throat. So during a funeral, what we offer a loved one is to wipe out their eyes with the softest doeskin we have available, the softest material we have available, to cleanse and to comfort and wipe the pain, the tears. So it's metaphoric, but it's also literal in a way, yeah, So we wipe off the eyes so vision can return. We grab a seagull's wing, and the very tip of the seagull wing feather, it comes to a bit of a point, and we use that to clean out the ears, so our loved ones can hear their children again. They can hear the birds. They can hear those things that they enjoy. They're no longer plugged with the burning and of a death in their family. So we clear out the ears, and then we grab the purest and coldest spring water to clear the throat, so we can see, hear, and speak again. Because grief can cause that. And then we work, before the embers grow cold, we work to bring those logs back together. We bring our fire back together, and we rekindle that fire. But you know what? We keep those embers. And metaphorically, we keep them in our hearts. So at any time, anybody should claim, Ruth Bader Ginsburg or anybody else, anytime they want to claim that our embers have grown cold, no, we're going to take those embers and we're going to reignite them. We're going to blow on them. We're going to bring the kindling and the birch bark, and we're going to reignite that fire. So no, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, our embers have not long grown cold to the point that we cannot rekindle our sovereignty. It never really died. They never grew cold. We always kept them warm. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a fairly recent figure. Yeah, a fairly recent figure. And people have all kinds of different opinions about her. My opinion is not one that's great. I think she's responsible for the court having slipped so far to the right that it's hard to even call them a council of judges anymore. But she also made these rulings. She made these kinds of comments that are the embers of our sovereignty had long grown cold. And she cites the doctrine of Christian discovery, which is the very thing that she claims, quenched our embers and put that fire out. But you know what? The other doctrines that I talk about all the time, the trust doctrine, is constantly talked about. You hear president after president, you hear congressman after congressman. You hear Native leadership continuously citing the trust responsibility. There is no trust responsibility. I know I say this all the time on the program, but I'm going to say it again. It's not just a myth, it's derogatory. To suggest that we are wards of the federal government, that they are our trustees, that they somehow have our best interest at heart and control everything. Look, 90% of all native lands in the U.S. are held in trust by the federal government. And you know what? You know what the assets were? Many of the assets were things like mining contracts, oil leases, grazing leases, timber leases. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs mismanaged the assets of Native people to the tune of likely, because we don't even know because they burnt the records, because they knew they were guilty, to the tune of $100 billion worth of assets gone. Much of it is just gone, but a lot of it was just mismanaged through nepotism, giving out contracts that were valued at pennies on the dollar. Speaking of pennies on the dollar, that $100 billion worth of lost assets was settled by the Obama administration for $4 billion. That's literally pennies on the dollar. So, trust responsibility? You're the trustee? People would go to prison if they violated the beneficiary or the wards of a trust in such a manner. So it's absurd to suggest this. Then, worst of all, is this idea that Congress should have this unique power over Native people, only over Native people, to manage every aspect of their life. And to have this judge in the 1830s suggest that came from Congress's, framers, from the Constitution's framers, is like among the top 5 lies ever told. And like I said at the beginning of the program, I know because I've read all the information. I researched this, and there's no place that suggested that the framers of the Constitution ever intended Congress to have any authority over Native people. The only authority they were granting them was the authority over their people conducting commerce with us, not us conducting commerce with each other. It never said that Congress held the power to regulate commerce of Indian tribes or of Native individuals. It just said that they had the authority, the power to regulate commerce with us. The same power they had that they were being granted to regulate commerce with foreign nations. Now, to interpret that meant that Congress had power over all of our affairs is to suggest that this was granting Congress power over the world. And of course that's absurd. And some of these guys know it. I think Sam Alito knows it. Now, I don't expect these guys to come to our aid, nor do I think they should. I just think we've got to wipe the slate clean. We've got to eliminate any of this stuff. So we got to fight the doctrine of Christian discovery. We got to fight the trust doctrine, and we got to fight the plenary powers doctrine. That's my life's mission right now. Now, along the way, I'm going to go after some white privilege associated with the mascot issue. I got it done in New York. And look, and I want to be clear here. I didn't get this done alone. I think I played a singular role in getting the statewide ban, but make no mistake about it. I'm standing on the shoulders of other people. I did the show Native America Calling, and the host there was completely unaware of what took place at the University of Illinois, because he brought it up. He said, "Well, what about University of Illinois? They got the Fighting Illini. They bring that chief out on the that was eliminated over 15 years ago. I mean, almost 20 years ago now, and that fight happened primarily by one woman, Charlene Teeters. She was a student, but she was also teaching there. And she fought this by herself. She carried signs. She had people spitting at her, throwing beer on her, doing all kinds of heinous things, threatening her with violence, simply because she was appalled by them running out a white boy doing flips and some, some gestures that they claimed was some sort of native dance, just making a mockery of who we were. She protested it at every game. The first time she saw it was at a basketball game, guy running out on a basketball court. Then she saw it in the football stadium. Now this is a major Division I college. She got support from a guy by the name of Jay Rosenstein, who was teaching there too. And they produced a documentary, the first documentary on calling out mascots. It was called In Whose Honor. I encourage you to take a look at it, find it, watch the film. It's an important film, and it really is the first one, and it's the one that everybody has built upon after that, including the film Fighting Indians, one that I screened out in the Cinema Arts Center in Huntington. But this is the first one, and I've become good friends with Jay Rosenstein over the years. But it's the work of people like Charlene Teeters and Jay Rosenstein, because you know what happened? Not only did the University of Illinois get rid of their mascot, they've been fighting like hell. There are people trying to call them the Kingfishers, which I think is a good mascot, but it still hasn't been accepted yet. But it led to the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association. They banned, just like New York State did in high schools, the NCAA banned the use of native mascots, across the country. And they're all gone with a few exceptions. I mean, the one exception that everybody always comes to mind is always going to be Florida State, still calling themselves the Seminoles. And that's because the Seminole Nation, or at least individuals within the Seminole Nation, have given permission for them to keep making a mockery of them. And they do make a mockery. Make no mistake about it. At Florida State University football games, they used to ride, and I don't know if they still do this, but they put a white boy in some regalia. They put him on a horse, and they call him Chief Osceola. They ride him out on a horse, and they literally light a spear on fire, and he chucks a spear into the from the horse onto the football field. I mean, you cannot create any more of a stereotypical Hollywood image than that. For one thing, Seminoles weren't horse culture. Sorry, they just weren't horses. I'm not saying Seminoles don't ride horses today. I'm sure they do. I'm sure they have horses. But historically, Osceola was not this champion of horsemanship. So it's absurd. And then to reduce us to like flaming spear chuckers? Are you freaking kidding me? All I can say is the Seminoles of Florida, you should be ashamed of yourself still endorsing that. The Seminoles of Oklahoma, they still condemn it, by the way. But again, Florida State got permission from, and the same thing at the state level. Look, I sat on the New York State Indigenous Mascots Advisory Council. One of the things that we did do when we were putting the regulations together was we said that a nation, federally recognized or state recognized nation, could grant permission in a circumstance where a school district had some sort of relationship with the nation that they were either adjacent to or nearby or a part of or something like that. So the Seneca Nation, yeah, I know I do this show from the Seneca Nation, but the Seneca Nation granted the city of Salamanca, their school district, permission to continue to call themselves the Warriors. Now, about 20%, 25% of the student body of the city of Salamanca are Senecas, are native. Almost the entire school district is within, I don't mean ancestrally, almost the entire school district is within the Seneca territory of Allegheny. It's in there. I mean, in fact, the land is leased. All of the city of Salamanca is leased from the Seneca Nation. So the school district is on Seneca land. And again, about a quarter of the student body are native, most of them Senecas. But that means the vast majority of student body are not. The problem that I have with it is not just the whole idea of letting white people still play Indian, but even their logo is a chief. It's not a warrior. But the other reason they gave permission is because it was kind of a fairly prominent Seneca artist that designed the logo for them. So he designed the logo, which is again an 18th century depiction of what a Seneca chief would look like. So their logo is a chief, their nickname are the Warriors, and the Seneca Nation gave them permission to keep it. Not loving the idea, and I know Senecas who don't like the idea either. I know some Senecas who graduated from Salamanca. So yeah, we like having our native mascot. But I don't know if the Senecas were polled. I know they weren't. Or if the Seneca students were polled. I know they weren't. The city of Salamanca, or the Salamanca School District, claimed that they did some sort of unofficial poll of all students, and they supported keeping it. But I don't know. I like the idea of the Seneca Nation or of Native peoples having the final say. I like that idea. I just hope they would never grant it. And just like the Seminoles did with Florida State University, the Senecas did with the Salamanca School District. Don't know that it'll last. I mean, even at the time, the president, a guy by the name of Ricky Armstrong, he basically said it's not permanent permission. We don't know that it'll last. And frankly, if the city of Salamanca were wise, they would change it on their own. Just not have to have the hammer come down on them. Because look, part of what folks like at Massapequa are complaining about is that it's going to cost them a lot of money to change their mascot. They said, some of these guys are saying it's going to cost $1 million to get rid of all that imagery. $1 million? Somebody should be asking, how the hell did you spend $1 million investing in a mascot that the Commissioner of Education 20 years ago told you to get rid of anyway? How the hell could you have spent that much money? And somebody should be held responsible for that. That's absolutely a misappropriation of tax dollars or school resources. Now, granted, I understand some of these schools get a lot of school sports booster money. But you know what? If you spent that money putting yourself in a hole after you're told in 2001 to get rid of these things, that's your bad. That's you being irresponsible. So look, I have no pity on a school saying, well, it's going to cost us a lot of money to get rid of this thing. Well, you should have phased it out over 20 years. It wouldn't have cost you a dime. That's why Richard Mills, the commissioner back in 2001, said, do it in a time that's practical. He was sensitive to the idea that it could be costly. He didn't give a deadline. He said, get rid of them, and get rid of them as soon as practical. And by practical, he meant financially. That's what he meant. He didn't mean 21 years, 22 years. I mean, that's not what he considered practical. And the fact is that schools like Massapequa, they didn't just ignore Richard Mills. They doubled down on their use of mascots. They've got it every freaking place. And of course, even the town's got it all over the place too. So even as the school will ultimately have to get rid of this mascot, the town will probably still have these paintings up, murals up and stuff like that, and on their fire trucks and whatnot. Until people finally get sick of it, so yeah, it's kind of absurd, but again, this is what white privilege is. The idea that white people can basically claim anything they want. And it can be for there's no pressing need. In fact, I wrote a post, and I've said this in a couple of my interviews. This isn't like a balanced argument, right? It's not. It's not like there's good people and good ideas on both sides of this debate. No, there aren't. There's 1,001 reasons why this is wrong, and there's no good reason why it's appropriate, why it should be allowed. There's none. Other than the fact that white people just want to play Indian. And I'm sorry, that's not a good reason. That doesn't hold up. It's not your history. And when I saw Donald Trump actually say, well, it's their identity now. Really? So you think white people now have somehow obtained and now have possession of Native identity, even if it's one they made up? Again, you can't make this stuff up. It's that level of absurdity. So I don't know. I will say that that's the reason I am so passionate about the mascot issue, is because it is so much related to all of the other unique forms of racism that Native people experience. Look, we see comments that come all the time. Look, the fact that the military has used native references for years, not just for their weapon systems, but they actually call enemy territory. I mean, just to be clear, I had a video or an audio I used to play on the show. I think it might, I don't know if it was Hegseth or not, but it was one of these guys on Fox News anyway. And he was making the comment about Indian country. And the reference he meant was that was considered enemy land, enemy territory, hostile territory. The military has always called Indian land. Well, why do you think that is? This is why I oppose the use of the word tribe, tribal, or tribalism when applied to our people. Because it's never meant anything but a derogatory expression. It's always meant something that is either unsophisticated, primitive, ignorant, savage. That's when they use the word tribe. So I won't use that word. The only time I use that word is when it's in a quote. And then I, make sure that I somehow put quotation marks or do something, air quotes. I do something so people know that that's not my word. I refuse to. And look, I hate it when I get introduced on a radio show and they say, well, he's a tribal member of the Mohawk Nation. No, I'm not. I'm not a member. I'm Mohawk. I'm Gunyagahaga. I'm not a member of a club. And I'm certainly not a member of a tribe. And look, it's our people who use these expressions too. And that's part of my work here. Yes, I'm trying to educate non-native people. And I'm trying to educate people who can understand what I'm talking about. So oftentimes it's other people of color. It's other people who've been oppressed. So all you people who can understand the genocide taking place in Gaza, you should have no difficulty understanding what I'm talking about here. And you should have no difficulty standing up. Because look, as I talked about Charlene Teeters and Jay Rosenstein and Amanda Blackhorse and so many other people, Donna Van Boyle, all these people that I've worked with over the years on this issue, we all need your support. You could stack all of us Native people together in a room, and we weren't going to change anything. We needed white folks, and we needed black folks. We needed people who were not Native to understand what we're talking about, and to be concerned enough to do something about it. That's why I come on the radio every week. That's why I appreciate being on WBAI so much. I know the people who listen to this station have this kind of sensibility to understand what I'm talking about. We need you. We need you to affect change because we're too small a population to affect change ourselves. We're not gonna vote to change anything. We saw how your votes work out. You end up with a guy like Donald Trump as president. Now I have no problem taking on Donald Trump. I don't care if he's the president or if he's just, a guy who owns a hotel. I have no problem taking him on. But we need your support to do it. So that's why I come on the radio. That's why I'm on WBAI, and I ask for your support. So again, I ask that you take the time, make a donation to WBAI. You can go online, or you can do it by phone. Reggie did a great job on the intro to the show, pitching for WBAI, and I know he does it, almost every hour. But I feel like I've got to do it during my program as well, because I need you to support this program being on WBAI specifically. There's no guarantee. Look, if WBAI has to make all of their programming choices based on who generates the most money, I'm probably not going to make the list. I'm not going to make the cut, folks, unless you guys really step up. So, look, I'll be back next week, still kicking it. So I want to thank you for listening to me this week, and we'll see you next week. I'm John Kane. This is Resistance Radio. Yahweh.